Design trends. Whether you care about them or not, if you are someone who consumes interior design content on a regular basis, you're probably going to hear about them. Because with the rise of social media and influencer culture, the volume of trends and the speed of the trend cycle show no signs of slowing down. Because, never forget, there is an end goal here to get you to buy stuff. So does this mean that all trends are inherently problematic? Not necessarily. If you recognize trends for what they really are, which, to put it bluntly, is a tool of capitalism, they tend to lose their power over you. So instead of feeling influenced or manipulated, you can just see trends as a source of ideas and inspiration. Unless, of course, they don't appeal to you, in which case you can completely ignore them. Now, as a person that doesn't put much stock into trends, I am not interested in making videos to lecture anyone about what is in and what is out. I would much rather inspire you to develop your own personal sense of style and encourage you to make choices that feel right for you. Because trends may come and go, but real, authentic, personal style, that's timeless. So let's look into what has been popular in design lately and see what we might want to just ignore, but what might also be worth a closer look. Cottagecore. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with cottagecore. It's been a pretty popular trend for quite some time now. And I do have to say that the name really annoys me. I don't understand why we're suddenly just taking nouns and tacking the word core onto the end of them, and then suddenly we have a new trend. But my hatred for the name aside, I'm going to try to evaluate this trend on the aesthetics. As the name suggests, the aim of cottagecore is to evoke the feeling of cottage living. So we're talking about warm and cozy spaces, traditional styles, vintage looks. And none of that is a bad thing. I can certainly understand the appeal. I would just exercise a certain degree of restraint when it comes to this look. I mean, if you live in an actual cottage, okay, that's fine, knock yourself out. But otherwise, you want to avoid doing anything that is going to make your home feel overly themed. There are certainly elements of this style that I like and that I think work well in smaller doses, things like pattern, like florals or ticking stripes. I would just mix these with other patterns to keep things feeling a little more interesting and a little less predictable. This also seems to be a style that embraces the use of color, so I do appreciate that because I am someone that thinks color is pretty much always a good idea. Granny chic, or what I have also heard referred to as grandmacore, but I think we all know how I feel about that name. So granny chic to me feels like a rebranding of cottagecore, just with a few more doilies and crocheted blankets. And here's the thing. I mean, who doesn't love a granny? I would be a cold and heartless person for putting down a trend that celebrates these lovely humans. And I'm sure that I am not the only girl who has received her share of these items as gifts over the years. So it is a nice little added bonus that a lot of us probably already own items that would really work for this trend. And even if you don't, I suspect that they would be quite easy to thrift. And again, I would just advise small doses for this trend. A framed embroidery or a crocheted cushion every now and again is a lovely way to honor the grandmothers in our lives, but you don't want to use so much of this style that people begin to mistake your home for hers. And as I say all the time, I love mixing styles. So a few granny chic pieces mixed in with a variety of other looks could be very cool. So the old money aesthetic. This is a trend that we've been seeing in both fashion and in interiors lately. And I think, or at least I hope, that we're using this term with tongue firmly planted in cheek, because emulating generational wealth is not really a style that I typically aspire to. So name aside, this style appears to be about what you've probably heard described as quiet luxury. So a concept that is more about quality, craftsmanship, and being tastefully understated. And those are all ideas that I can get behind. So if we're talking about carefully curating our homes with well-made, well-designed, and timeless pieces, then I'm all for it. But I see these as important values that we should always be keeping in mind when we're designing our homes, regardless of our style, rather than seeing this as a passing trend that somehow dictates a certain type of aesthetic. So let's take that lesson away from this trend rather than trying to impress people with homes that look like we come from supposed old money. Cafecore. Yes, we're back with another core trend. And this one takes its style cues from, you guessed it, cafes. So think of that classic French bistro with wooden chairs, checkerboard floors, and aged metals. Now, this is a trend that, of course, makes the most sense in spaces like kitchens and breakfast nooks. And while this particular aesthetic does have a more traditional feel to it, I actually think that you could look to any style of cafe for design ideas. They are often very well-designed spaces. So if there is a cafe that you love, whether it be traditional or more contemporary, absolutely consider taking your style cues from that space. They are a great source of inspiration, whether they are part of the Cafecore aesthetic or not. The Nancy Meyers aesthetic. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Nancy Meyers films, but did you know that the Nancy Meyers aesthetic has become a recent design trend? In fact, as I was doing research for this topic, what should pop into my Instagram feed but this post from Domino? So I guess this trend is still having a moment. And I get the appeal, I do. There's a certain cozy, casual vibe to her film sets, and I think there's also something quite timeless about this aesthetic. Now, if I'm being honest, it's a look that for me, I find a little bit safe and predictable, a little lacking in color, but that's really more just about my personal style preferences. There are a lot of people that love this look, and I can understand why they would. And as I said, I think there is a certain timelessness to this aesthetic, so I don't think you would ever really regret this kind of look. And if you did get a little bit bored, it would be very easy to refresh and update a space like this. Dark academia. Now, this seems to be a really popular trend right now with a lot of people, especially anyone that likes a dark, rich, enveloping space. I can see this being really well received by avid book lovers, anyone that really enjoys a good bookstore. So the defining characteristics of this aesthetic are things like dark colors, rich textures, soft lighting, and traditional furnishings. Maybe just go a little easy with the maps and globes and the tufted leather. Might just start to feel a little too on the nose. So having now looked at all of these design trends, I do want to point out that there seem to be some common elements among them. So these trends all tend to be leaning a little more traditional, with a certain propensity for nostalgia, use of vintage, and for the most part, more color, at least more than we had been seeing in years prior. Especially deep, rich reds, browns, blues, and greens. It's warmer and cozier vibes than the years of millennial gray and neutral beiges. And that's nice to see. I think that these are trends with more character and more room for self-expression, and that is definitely a good thing. So maybe instead of fixating on a particular style or aesthetic, we could take a more holistic approach that encompasses the best elements of all of these trends in a way that works for us, our homes, and our lives. And with that, we have reached the conclusion of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you at the next one, and bye for now, guys.